Just a few more weary days and then I'll fly away to a land where joy shall never end. I'll fly away.
Thank you. Go ahead and clap. I've been waiting for it. What's the matter with you? Brother Kahn is a very persistent man. When you can play 124 games of checkers before he wins one, you know he's really wanting to win one. Reminds me of the little boy whose mother put him to bed about 8 o'clock, gave him a good drink of water and tucked him in. And about 30 minutes he said, "Mama, bring me a glass of water." Now, I'm not going to call his name Charles, but now, son, son, you be quiet. I just gave you a drink of water. About 30 minutes later, he said, "Mama, bring me a drink of water." Now listen, son, if you don't hush, I'm coming in there and I'm going to whoop you. A little later he says, "Mama, when you come in to whoop me, will you bring me a drink of water?" I'll still have a few of these books left. You bought a lot of them. Right after we adjourn here, I'll get behind these chairs so you won't run over me. And if you want to buy a bunch of them, I have them for sale. I have a request to sing me and Pap and Mother. I'm glad Paul Laverne's here. Just a chip off of the old block. He's a great man. We're very proud of our son Paul and Dean and Donald. 3 great fellows. Married 3 fine women. Gave us 6 fine grandchildren. And they're all Church of Goddard, so I guess that's something to be thankful for. When I was a little child, I sat at the table between my mam and Pap, and I ate all that I was able. Pap set me on one side and Mother on the other. I tell you, we were chums them days, me and Pap and Mother. Sometimes we would take great long walks through the woods and pastures. Pap, he packs a cane. That old diamond willow cane is in my home this morning in Waimama. Mother and me takes after. Pap didn't gabble much. He held his head down thinking. Didn't seem to hear us talk, nor hear the cowbells clinking. Loving strains all cleared, worried out about one thing or other. Didn't seem to understand Pap, and that me and Mother. Then I got grown and went away. I left the farm behind me, and thinking of those parting years, it seems to chance to blind me. I thought I'd be well and good with my married brother, but we had to part, us 3, me and Pap and Mother. Then I hurried back one day, found Pap changed, all pale and hollow. Seemed right off that he'd have to go where we couldn't follow. Oh, we loved each other. Pap's dead now. Mother too. Seems now I can almost see their forefingers beckoning. Life ain't long. I'll go myself one of these days or other. Then we'll have great old times again. Me and Pat and Mother. Prettier hills we'll have to climb. Sort of long old-fashioned. We'll hear the wild birds singing round and see the river splashing. If God will only let us three be together like we'd rather, heaven will be a grand old place for me and Pat and Mother. Now since I traced my footsteps to that home of long ago, I find that everything has changed. While I was wandering to and fro, the grapevine swing has fallen down, which grew down near the mill. The old mud house where Mother prayed lies moldering now upon the hill. Though many years have passed and gone since at dear Mother's knee I prayed, now I would lay me down to sleep. I pray thee, Lord, my soul to keep. If I should die before I wake, I pray thee, Lord, my soul to take. There are two more verses, but I just felt like there might be a little spirit of jealousy here among the singers, and I'd better quit. I wanted to get into the music department, but nobody can teach a guitar like I play it. They wouldn't let me in. So here I am, just a loner, doing my little part. Now, yesterday morning we got to the place where that we had packed up the old 7-passenger Willys Knight and the Model T Ford and headed to Cleveland, Tennessee. And I'm not going through with that story because it's a little bit too long, and I want to hear Paul Laverne, and I'm sure you do. And so I'm going to wind up quite short in just a little time. But there's nothing like being a disciple of the Lord Jesus Christ. And if you would be my disciple, you remember we said, as we read the scripture, to deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. The whole crux and philosophy of the plan of redemption is built around and upon self-denial. Jesus denied himself when he came to this world. He denied himself when he went to Calvary. We deny ourselves when we accept the plan of redeeming grace. And those who stood in the front lines of the battle in the early days of the inception of the Church of God and its educational system were those who were willing to carry the load, despite the fact they had all kinds of opposition. We were not a trained ministry. Therefore, you can thank God from the depths of your heart for Lee College. I remember after having 2 or 3 great revivals, climaxing the one at St. Luke, Maryland, where my tent was burned. The church that was built was burned, but we had a lot to show for our effort. It was one of self-denial, cross-bearing, and following Jesus. One of our members died. Her name was Mrs. Washburn. We didn't have a church where we could conduct a funeral. So the Methodists said, well, Mrs. Washburn used to be a Methodist before she joined the church, so you can have a funeral in our church. And I was to preach it. I still say, Lord, help me when I think of that ordeal. I had never attended but one funeral in my life, and I was 5 years old. My shoes were run over, the soles were worn out, and I had pasteboard in the bottom of my shoe to keep me from walking on the ground. I had a suit that was cream colored. I got it at a second-hand place for $5. I was a beautiful looking specimen, but I was the state overseer, incidentally. But you never gave anybody any help those days. It was a matter of root hog or die. And I had to root, and I didn't want to die. So the day came for the funeral, and I didn't have any suit but that suit, and someone said, this is before I was married, and Margaret don't like me to tell this, but she isn't here. Someone said, now Fred Hitch has a suit I think that would be appropriate. So I went over to Fred's place, and I was poured into his suit, and it was green. I had a hard time getting into that regalia, but I finally did. And I went to the church, and it was packed. But what will I say, and what will I do? I was just a fellow from the wild and woolly West. I didn't have much of any preaching background or understanding as to how to conduct a funeral. So I went to the platform, and there was a great big white robed choir. And the choir sir came to me and said, now, Reverend, just give me your outline, and we'll follow along with whatever you offer us. Well, I said, I wouldn't do that because I had rather follow your way of doing. If you just tell me how you do it, that'll be the main thing. So he must have thought I was a little nervous, but I was real brave. I thought, though, if the Lord just make a hole 99 feet deep straight down, I'd drop in it. But there wasn't any hole there, so I had to stand. Wasn't like the man in my tent meeting, and the fellow hit him in the head with a rotten egg. Next morning, I saw him down at the depot sitting on his suitcase. I said, where are you going? He said, I'm going home and let God run his own business. A lot of people that are brave soldiers like that. Anybody can quit, you know. So, if you'll just tell me what the way you have it, that's the way we'll do it. So he comes on down the line with this song and with the prayer, and then he had that big long word that I'd never heard in my life, obituary. Obituary. What on earth is an obituary? I'm not near as stupid now as I was then. There's some of you folks that aren't too bright either, so don't. So, old Sister Sonora Brown sat down on the second seat in front, and so I slipped down there. I said, Sister Brown, what on earth is an obituary? And she looked at me as if she could cry. She opened up that big old pocketbook and got out a slip of paper and said, I'll write you one. And she wrote me Mrs. Washburn's obituary. So I preached hell, fire, and damnation. That's about all I knew, the best I could. And And just as I got through, the preacher came in, sat down by the door, and he was as mad as a wet hen on the rainy day with the gaps. I didn't blame him. I said, "Brother, would you come up and say a few words, please?" Well, he came up and he had a flow of language that would make angels fold their wings almost. And when we marched out, I said, "Now I want you to go with me to the cemetery." "Oh, no," he said, I won't do that. You go out ahead of the committal service." Well, I didn't know how to commit. I said, "Now listen, you go ahead." Families were saved, which actually were the backbone of our church in the plaza and parcel area, and later played a big part in our Minot work. But one day the wind swung around to the northeast, began to blow real hard. It was late in the fall and the ground was frozen quite deep. And snow began to fall and the mercury began to drop. And Sister Walker prematurely went into birth pain. Those days we didn't believe in doctors. Man's ministry is almost questioned if he had a doctor. Some even buried their children without a doctor. But we have found out a few things since then. And as she struggled for about 17 hours, I finally was able to go to Stanley and have a man drive through the snowbanks and the rough and rugged dirt roads to the home of Henry Tighe, where Margaret was. It was an old big house, and they hadn't got their winter coal in yet. They just heated it with lignite slack, and that was almost impossible. And that day in our home were born a pair of little twin girls. They cried loudly. They seemed to be well, but the doctor said, "It's too cold here. They'll chill to death in this house." He said, "Wrap them up in woolen shawls. Put them in the warming oven of the old kitchen range, and you can keep the temperature pretty even. And as soon as they gain a little strength and they begin to take food, then no doubt will be all right." But somehow it failed, and they both died. I'd been offered a job before that paid me $50,000 in about 10 years, with all the white-faced heifer calves of 100 brood cows of the white-faced Hereford stock, if I would work for Jack Crowley. Father said, "Paul, you're called to preach." I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "You better get at it." So I gave up the job and went out to Epworth for this revival. And after the little, precious little darling twins died, I didn't have the money for a casket. I went out to the wood pile, and there I found an octagon soap box. I rebuilt it, padded it with cotton batting, and covered it with mosquito bar. Put the two little twins in there on a pillow and took them into the bedroom for their mother to see them. Margaret and I, she was a great soldier. We wept together. I went out and helped dig the grave through the frozen dirt, 6 feet deep, planted this little casket beneath the sod. We piled the heavy frozen chunks of dirt on the mound, and there was a little short mound where our babies lay. The devil came to me as I stood at the head of the grave, and I wept. And he said this: "This is the way God paid you off. If you'd have worked for Jack Crowley, see what you've gotten. Ha ha, this is what you get. It sounded like he might be right. But when that voice subsided, I heard another one. And it said, we live by dying. By our poverty, we make many rich. We are strangers, yet we're well known. And we possess all by giving all. He doesn't settle his accounts every Saturday or every November. But when the saints come marching in, thank God we'll be repaid 1,000,000 times for our sacrifice for a cause that we ought to love better than our own lives. It's been a blessing and a privilege for me to be here. I want to come back again if you'll have me, and God bless you real good.